Welcome to How I Broke That.
Bobbi Kurshan has worn many hats in her 30 plus years in education. From professor to edtech innovation pioneer to author, she has made her mark. But Kurshan's efforts to affect the education space were not always smooth, even though they have been successful. She had to break glass ceilings, prove herself repeatedly as she tackled new professional opportunities, and, quote, be a woman challenged in a man's world. By listening to our show today, you'll learn where Kurshan started her teaching career and how, when, and why she knew it was time to leave the classroom. What it was like being at the forefront of EdTech and designing the first education software for Microsoft. Very impressive. And hear all about her latest book, Innovators, and what she learned about women and entrepreneurs she studied. So, breakers, band together and be ready for Bobbi Kurshan to blow us all away. Bobbi, join me. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
How are you doing today? Where are you?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Cool. Good old Washington, D.C. Well, you and I had a nice chat before the show, and we took a kind of a journey doing some Jewish geography, but also a journey through your personal and professional career. And I think it makes the most sense to start with you being a professor. And I wanted to read a part of your book here that we will certainly talk more about. It's on page 7, so we're not too far in here. And it says, I have taught middle school, high school, undergraduate computer science, teacher education, and professional development, graduate school programs on education entrepreneurship, and the first ever corporate training for nurses on the use of digital record keeping. You've done some teaching.
I have.
Where did it all start?
My first love.
Tell us where it all started, though.
Well, I started when I graduated from undergraduate with a degree in mathematics and computers. And at that time, computers meant taking, punch cards to the computer and waiting overnight for them to get returned. I actually just dated myself. But anyway, I went to work for Commonwealth Edison in Chicago as a programmer. And at that time, engineers didn't do their own programming, you did. And I did that. And I loved my work and it was very challenging, but I wasn't having an impact on anybody directly.
Mm.
So I took a year off and traveled around Europe and spent time in Israel. And when I returned, I decided I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to teach computers. So I went back to Virginia Tech to get my master's in computer science and my teaching certification. And I went to teach after that. And one of the experiences was when I graduated, well, I thought I'll just get a job. It'll be really easy now that I have a master's in computer science. And I called the largest employer of computer scientists in Roanoke, Virginia. And I swear this is what the lady said. She said to me, honey, can you key punch? And I said, what? I said, I just told you that I have a master's in computer science. And I said, no, I don't key punch. And I hung up the phone and I turned to my husband and I said, I'm not going to go into computer science. I'm going to teach kids, women and men, little girls and little boys about computers. And that's what I did. And that's what I got my doctorate in instructional design to be able to design products and teach. So that's how I got into teaching and how I moved from being teaching, staying in the computer science direct field of being a programmer or systems analyst to being a teacher.
So you were at Virginia Tech, you were at Hollins College, and
Mhm.
then one of the things I read in your book was that you're just too darn entrepreneurial for the university. What did that mean, and how did that feel?
Well, I was very close with the president of Hollins College. It was a woman, and I was always challenging. This is an old, historic women's college, hundreds of years old, very large, popular alumni. And I remember when I first got there going to Olson, who was the president of Digital Computers at the time, and requesting that he donate 2 of his first mini computers to us. They were called VAX computers. And I thought, oh, he's just going to put this in the trash can letter, kind of letter from a woman. And
Mm,
I literally almost the next day got a letter back saying, we'd be glad to give you 2 computers. And he did.
mm,
And he sent these two VAX computers. And when there was a terrible flood in Roanoke about a year later, they were destroyed. And he sent two new ones. So we were very lucky. They were donated. And so I kept doing things like that. And then when it came time for me to, I wanted to move into a tenure slot, came time to move in, they decided that they didn't want me as a tenure slot. And I went to the dean and the president. I said, "What's going on here?" And the president said to me, "Bobbi, you're too entrepreneurial for a traditional tenure program at a university. You're trying to break the mold
Hmm.
by not necessarily publishing, which I did a lot of, by the way, I'd written books and everything, but by looking to way to change what we consider traditional higher education." So I decided that was a good time to leave university life. Interestingly, I came back to it and ended at a university, University of Pennsylvania. So
So, okay, fine. You heard her and you said, look, then I'm going to go be entrepreneurial. And that brought you to EduCorp, right?
right. I created an incubator, I mean, a consulting firm to basically build educational technology products. And I
For,
went on to build Microsoft's Creative Writer and Fine Artist. I went on to build some of the very first bundles for Apple, the first CD-ROM for McGraw-Hill in math education. I continued to design educational technology products, and then ultimately, with my husband, acquired a technology company that had a software for teaching language, which we ultimately took public on the UK stock exchange.
okay, let's talk more about that.
So I went from sort of being a teacher to being computer scientist to being a teacher, and now guess what? I was an entrepreneur and I was a investor kind of
Right.
thing, and went
Yeah.
on to ultimately, as you know, run an investment firm, a private equity firm of $50 million. But when we did that, I basically, when I started in that, I think I say this in the book, I didn't know the difference between being in a commercial banker or an investor, but I'm a quick learn, and it was an
Mhm.
exciting journey.
Yeah. And so, can you talk about, say, Big Chalk? Tell us some of the highlights of your experiences doing that.
Well, Big Chalk was our I'm always been innovative, and Big Chalk was our first big investment from Core Learning. We put a lot of money into it. We raised $100 million in 2000, which was right at the height of the dot com, but right before the crash.
Hmm.
We grew it to a significant business. We merged it with eLibrary, and we spun out the K through 12 business from ProQuest. We put them together, and we were basically the first online curriculum company and library. It was really ahead of its time. Sometimes I think I'm often too ahead of my time, but anyway, it was really ahead of our time. We went on, three of us, my partner from Core Learning Investments, Susan Harmon, and Jack Lynch, who's now the CEO of HMH. We went on to build Big Chalk, to grow it and get it ready to take it public on during the dot com. And we ended up not taking it public. It was right at the crash. However, when we got out, we returned to our investors' money. They didn't lose money, which was unusual at that time. At that time, you just wanted to break even when the crash came.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So now let's move on to kind of another pivot and move into the nonprofit world. Nonprofit, no problem, right? Another
Right,
success.
right. So I basically, after we finished Big Chalk and I was deciding what I wanted to do next, out of the blue, I got a call from Scott McNeely, who was the CEO of Sun Microsystems, and he asked me if I wanted to run his nonprofit around open source education. You know, Scott believed he was the founder of open source because of Java and his operating system. So I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll take the job." And I went from building a company out of nothing, building the platform for open source educational resources. It's still around. It's called Curriki. It's now got lots of competitors, but it's still out there, and you can go on there and develop open source curriculum, share your curriculum, and put together your own open source free curriculum. And we went
Mm.
around the world, um, starting Curriki. And if you go to the site, it's now called Curriki Studio because now you can build your own curriculum, not just take other people's curriculum. And it was a very exciting time to be in the industry and a time to be sort of the thought leader around OER.
You said something earlier. You said, kind of, I'm back at a school. And I think you used the word end. I don't think there is an end for pretty much anything that you do, but I will say that now you're at Penn,
Right.
and I've wanted to kind of zip us through your journey so that we can then reflect. So I'm moving us quickly through, but let's talk about Penn, and then we will reflect together.
Well, kind of exactly what you started with. We ended up, I got a call from the dean who I knew from the industry. And he said, Bobby, I want somebody to come in that will shake up graduate schools of education. If we don't, they're going to die. And I
Mm,
said, sure, Andy, I'll come. But here's the rules that I'll come on. One, you can't afford me. Two, I'm not moving to Philly. And three, I will do it for 2 years. And this was before COVID. So they expected you to move to Philly and be there. And he called back and said, okay, you're hired. And I said, but wait, there's two other things.
uh-oh.
One, I want to start a master's program in education entrepreneurship, which was really controversial because schools of education think they're serving the good. They think of entrepreneurship as something
Mm,
that money, people want to make money. They don't understand that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking has nothing to do with making money. And third, I said, I want to start an incubator and I want to raise a fund to do it. Well, he said, "Okay." And so I came. I actually ended up taking an apartment in Philly and spending the week up there most
mm.
weeks. And I stayed 10 years now, not 2, but most of it worked. And we've changed deans during the time who's also has been thinking about being innovative and what that means.
That's nice. Look, I mean, minus the sports, Philly can be a wonderful city, and
It
you and I know
is.
getting from DC to Philly on the train is
Mm,
nice and easy.
right.
So not so bad. So, like I said, I kind of zipped us through that because I wanted our audience to hear of all the different things that you've done. I think it's really inspiring for them to hear. As you and I talked, you've kind of moved through 4 phases as a researcher, an entrepreneur, an educator, and an investor. And you
Mhm.
said driven your journey and your path. When you take a step back, if you have the time to do it in between kind of promoting your book and spending time with your family, how do you feel about the journey that you took, and um, how can you inspire others to do just like you've done?
Well, I'm always inspiring others because I tend to believe, as I said in the book, mentorship is what leads to success for women, not only women but men, but particularly women in the book. And so I've always feel like I could give back as a mentor. So I spend a lot of time doing mentoring. I feel very proud of my journey. I like the ability that I was able to pivot because when somebody asks me if I like change, the answer is no, I hate change.
Hmm.
But I do it. I hate the thought of change. Once I've made the change, I'm very excited about it. So it's been a great journey and it's clearly not over. I am enjoying promoting the book. I am enjoying still teaching at Penn our certificate on innovation and entrepreneurship. And I serve on a corporate board, which in private education. So it's great.
Yeah. I mean, for our audience, I think change is synonymous with breaking. We say breaking for good, they're breakers. So I think
Mhm.
that hopefully you say change, they hear break, and break is all good.
Mm,
We're about 15 minutes in of this journey together, and we're going to start talking about the book. And
great.
so
Mhm.
I was lucky enough to get a copy of the book, and it is signed, which I've reminded myself of yesterday. We met in New Orleans at ISTE, and started kind of connecting some of these dots from DC and being Jewish and being in education and entrepreneurs and all that great stuff. So, can you kind of talk about the book? Give everybody, a briefing on the book, kind of like you were able to give me at that pretty cool bar in New Orleans.
Yeah, it was a cool part.
Yeah.
So I wrote the book because after doing 10 years of research at the University of Pennsylvania on entrepreneurial mindset thinking, I decided that I wanted to share what I was learning, but I didn't want to write another academic book. I've written lots of those and lots of academic articles. I've worn a researcher hat. I've been a university professor, but I wanted to tell stories because I thought that was the most powerful part of what I've been doing. And I also did want to write another academic book. I wanted to write a trade book because I wanted it to be available to those people that go to the market, look on Amazon to find something that might help them with their career, help them think about being a woman in business or technology. So I took the research and I dissected it. And the research had been based on something called the entrepreneurial mindset profile. It's been given to hundreds of thousand entrepreneurs around the world. And we looked at that data as the baseline. We then gave the profile to over 250 of our students in our master's program, entrepreneurs that came through our business plan competition, and entrepreneurs that contacted me through my job at Penn. We asked them if they'd just take it. So we had a lot of base data. We dissected it. And while I saw a lot of interesting things about men as well as women, I was most fascinated by some of the data that was showing up or popping up around women. And I had interviewed hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs, women and men. So I decided that we would write this book. And I sort of, one of my favorite writers is Malcolm Gladwell, who
Hmm.
does research, or Adam Grant, who are both professors. They do a lot of research. But the reason you read their books is because the stories that are in the books.
Yeah.
And Malcolm Gladwell is a wonderful storyteller, as is Adam. So that's what the book's about. That's why I wrote it. And I had fun writing it. It was different than writing my other books. So the process do a whole show on the process of writing a book,
I think
but
so.
we
I
won't do
think
that
so.
today. But the process was a journey of itself.
There's another wonderful writer who's my business coach. She's in Northern Virginia, and she just wrote a book. And I think it'd be great to have you on and her on, and we could talk about that process. I
Mhm.
couldn't help when I was reading the book, and I spent some time yesterday here under the beautiful Mexican sun reading part of it, and I was listening to the stories that you were telling, but I was also thinking about the people around me. I happen to be surrounded by many strong women, including my wife, my mom, my
Mhm.
Aunt Allison, my Aunt Jane, my Aunt Elaine. I mean, I can go on and on, and one of the profiles that they all fit under that you mentioned was calculated risk takers. And
Yes.
so, talk about why women who rise to the top are calculated risk takers.
Well, often when we think about risk, we put that as a high decision maker on whether we're going to invest in an entrepreneur. Were they worthy, or do they take risk? And when I started to look at the data, I found that women entrepreneurs take risk, but it'll lower their profile on that is lower. However, when I dug into the stories and I dug into the data, I found out that they were taking risk just as much as men, but they were much more calculated about their
Mhm.
risk, which meant they looked at data more. They were less likely to pivot until they had all a really good story for pivot. I think I invest in entrepreneurs all the time, and I like gut, and I go on my gut a lot. But women use their gut, but it's based on a lot of data that they collect. And
Hmm.
also, they're much more sort of, as I say, is one of the other things, they're much more um, empathetic about the risks they take. They consider the people involved and what impact it will have on them. So that combination makes them very effective risk takers.
And when they're ready to take that risk and they think it's time, imposter syndrome can
Yeah,
be a real thing and can set in, right? And
right.
can that affect taking that risk? And maybe some of these risks that should have been taken don't get taken because of imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is a really interesting, attribute to study about women. And when I once shared this with a man, he said men have imposter syndrome too. They just don't tell you about it.
Hmm.
But most women matching their calculated risk and their imposter syndrome, actually, it helps them get over their imposter syndrome. So because they're calculated about it, when they more carefully think about it and don't go on their gut, they realize that experience they had with imposter syndrome shouldn't have affected their career, and they move on. So most of the successful women in this book learn to deal with their imposter syndrome, learn to realize that they do have high self confidence, which is one of the attributes needed for a successful entrepreneur. And they don't really think about it. Most of them told one story about it and said that that was the sort of defining moment in their career, not the limiting moment in their career.
Hmm. Is putting imposter syndrome aside, do women sometimes get worried?
Mhm.
And again, of course, men have this too, but we're focused on the book and your data here as career climbers, or being too aggressive, and does that happen? And can you talk about that from the book?
That was one of the biggest surprises we found in the book, actually. We found that when we asked women on our self-assessment of their entrepreneurial mindset to identify their strength, none of them picked need to achieve as their number one strength. And
Hmm.
yet, when you listen to their stories, all of them had that need to achieve. All of them were looking to, move up in their ladder, make sure that they grew up in underserved communities. They were looking to move up out of that. They were looking to make sure that their children were educated. And one of the other factors that influenced that was who was their mentor. And interestingly, when we asked women who of their mother or father who was their mentor, most of the women, more than 90% of the women in the book, picked their mother. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean their mother had the career or that their mother was, bringing in all the money, but the mother was the most entrepreneurial in their experience. The mother was juggling their home. They were juggling sometimes low-end careers. They had 3 or 4 children. So they looked at their mother and they looked at their need to help and to do better and to get out of that syndrome. And so, yes, there was definitely a connection between the imposter syndrome and the need to achieve, but they never identified that as when we went through our data as their strength. And yet it showed up as one of their highest strengths when we took the profile.
Interesting. So, um, how can an entrepreneur select a great mentor?
Mentoring is so essential. And I think it's not so much the selection of the mentor, it's the asking for the mentor.
Hmm.
Most people say, "Boy, I would really love to sit down at the table with, Obama or, you know, Mandela or any of those people, or who would be the person you'd want to have mentor you." They know who they want to be the mentor. They just don't know how to get to that person. So the biggest sort of barrier to overcome to finding the right mentor is asking them. You can
Hmm.
only get the answer no. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've written to somebody that I think, "Oh, they'll never answer me," and I get an answer back. All of us on Twitter or on LinkedIn don't know if somebody will accept our requests to be on LinkedIn, and what does that mean? So, yes, mentors are essential. It plays a big role. You need to ask for a mentor, and you need to make sure you use that mentor. Don't call me, and I mentor lots of young entrepreneurs, and they call me, and then I say, "Well, I'll be your mentor, but here are the ground rules. One,
Hmm.
you have to talk to me regularly if you really want to be mentored. It can't be something you call me 6 months later. And I don't mean we have to have a formal time, but we need to set up a time, regular times that we connect, whether it's over a drink, whether it's going at a meeting that we see each other for 10 or 15 minutes and we get an update. And I won't accept being on an advisory board of a company, even unless the person says, I don't want to be, you won't just be a name on my website. I
Right.
want you to I want to regularly speak with you. And I will often have to call and remind them that it's been, a couple of months. Do you want to give me an update? And they always respond. But you have to be the person, both on the mentor and the mentee side, of making that work, that relationship work.
So this book is, you know, 200 plus pages. So
Hmm.
I kind of hate to ask this question, but I want to give our audience a feel for what they're going to read when they get the book. So can you put goosebumps on their bodies? Tell us one story that just stands out for you.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of stories that stand out.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this book, when you read the book, you will find multiple stories that relate to things you're thinking about and how you feel about something. In
Mhm.
addition, you don't have to read the book from page 1 to page, 250. You can read any story you want. You can start there and read the story because the stories are moving, that the kind of, stories that get featured in the newspaper about great people doing great things. But I'll share one story I particularly like. I like all of them. The
I know.
story that I'm gonna share, though, is about Lisa Hall. Lisa Hall now runs the largest social impact fund for Apollo Management. She ran the Calvert Fund in Washington, D.C. She went to Wharton, and then she went to Harvard. By the way, all the bios of the women are in the back of the book, but Lisa's is particularly interesting. And Lisa graduated from Wharton, and she wanted to do her parents had brought her up to have a social impact. Her parents, one parent, I think they were both educators, but I know for sure her mother was an educator. But she ended up taking a job with a bank because she needed to pay back her student loans. She had a Wharton degree, so she was highly recruited, diversity, all that. And she tells the story of just by luck, she says, she gets into a position where she's providing funds for community housing. That was what the bank was doing.
Okay.
And she thought, "Oh my gosh, here I found into this job where I'm making money, I'm having an impact, and I can make a difference." And she said that I got to do well as do good. And
Mm.
that became a theme throughout the book, wanting to do well as do good. And Lisa's story goes on to be very, very fascinating. She ended up going over to run one of the largest family funds in education out of the world in the net in Amsterdam, lived in Amsterdam, and then she returned and worked at Georgetown at their lab. So Lisa's story kind of led our thinking about our book. We almost called it "Do Well to Do Good," but we decided
Mhm.
we needed a more positive story.
Do well to do good. And the last part I'll ask you about here is collaborate. It
Mhm.
seems like that was also a thread among the
Right.
people that you profiled here, is that women want to collaborate and they stay longer. Is that true?
That's true. It's because of their interpersonal sensitivity, which I mentioned earlier, their empathy. They hire better teams that stay together longer, and they run more collaborative teams. But the interesting sort of anecdote around that is they also fire better. Women
Hmm.
are able to fire people better because they go into a situation where they know somebody doesn't fit and they say, you don't, it's this position isn't right for you. Let me help you find what you're going to do next. Men go into the position of firing and they say, we're reorganizing and you don't fit. It may be very calm and very nice, and they'll offer to, give them severance or whatever. But the whole approach is different between a woman and a man. So collaboration and empathy play a big role in the women that we interviewed, but in the data we looked at of all the women.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention Amina, Eileen, Jean, and Charlie Ray, who are on my team,
Mhm.
here at Cascade,
Yeah.
and who are all amazing people, certainly driven, and I hope that they get a chance to read this book. So because they would see a lot of themselves in this book
We
as
hope
well.
so.
So
We
yeah,
hope
they're
that's
great
what's
people.
happening. Yeah, we hope lots of people see themselves or see stories, because one of the other stories by the woman who runs the Lutheran Refugee Fund, she says in the book that she wants to be a role model because women and men need to see it to be it. So if you
Yeah.
can't see somebody doing it, then you won't be it. So we hope that book will guide people there.
Yeah, cool. Well, the book is great. We will certainly link to it in our show description. There are breakers upon breakers upon breakers that you profile, and you are a breaker, Bobby. So thank you for joining us. We really enjoyed it. And I do think we have to have a follow-up conversation where we just talk about writing a book, because I think it's a fascinating process, that you wrote this book, and clearly you wrote it pretty quickly, I would think, because there's some numbers here about COVID. So actually, just last question: how long did it take?
Well, the real work took about a year. The research took 10 years. And my co author, Kathy Hurley, has worked very well with me in help promoting the book and marketing it. And Kathy and I have been friends for many, many years. And so we worked together. And Laura, who was one of my students at Penn, worked as us as a researcher and writer. So between the three of us, we were able to get the book literally out in about a year.
I don't know Kathy, but I know Laura. She was
Mhm,
introduced to us by our friend John Gamba, and
mhm.
she lives here in Mexico as well. And
Right.
I got to know her, and then she kind of fell off the face of the earth. And now I know what she was doing.
Right.
So she was
Who
doing
was
great work.
writing a book
So
with me. She's fabulous, and you
yeah,
should contact her. She lives not where you live, but in between you and Mexico City.
she's close. We will
Yeah.
we will get together. So thank you for your time. I'll see you back in DC, but we'll be in touch. We'll connect here again, and really appreciate having you.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Next time on How I Broke That.